everyone to Shift Notes Season 2. Whoop whoop. Can't. I'm joined here by Mikey Bahr. We've got Giancarlo Jesus, and we have our special guest for Season 2, our first guest, and Mikey will be introducing her shortly. First, we'd just like to say that we actually can't believe we've made it to a Season 2, so thank you so much to everyone who has taken the time to listen to us over the last year. It's actually been incredibly surprising and actually pretty uplifting when we've been kind of hearing comments from people in day-to-day life saying, hey, when's the next episode coming? Or when are you guys kicking Shift Notes back off? So thank you so much for all the support. We are incredibly excited for the lineup of guests we've got this year. We've put our heads together to think of some amazing people we could bring to you and inspire you through many different walks related to the hospitality industry and some people outside of the industry. Our first guest has got one hell of a CV, and we can't wait to hear from her. And I think Gian might have a few words as well.
Yeah, I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone that's really supported us and given us the sort of encouragement to keep this going and wanting us to be able to help everyone, really. I think we're not really over the little bump of last year, but I think together we're kind of getting this pretty well. But yeah, pretty excited about the interviews we've got coming up and very excited about having a chat with a dear friend.
Yeah, so stoked with the uptake on what we've kind of put together over the last year. It's been, as we talked about in the kind of wrap up, it was quite a lot of work, but definitely rewarding. And yeah, it's really cool to it's going to be really awesome for us to be able to showcase the people that we've hopefully lined up for this season. And obviously we're also open to your guys' ideas if there's anybody who you want to see. So yeah, but without further ado, we should probably introduce the wonderful lady well, she's to my right, but I don't know whether that's to everybody else's right. So we'll just go with that. Where to start? Wow. Tash McGill is basically family. She has been for many years for me and probably Gian as well. She's the big sister we never had. She's personally done a lot for me with regards to advice around my personal business and probably outside of that, tasting some of my drinks over the however many years. Sorry. Myself and Gian, we lucky to have her on the other side of the bar as a barfly as young bartenders. Again, sorry for that. She probably tried some of the craziest little creations that we've put together. Some were delicious. Most of them were delicious, right, G? We made some pretty good drinks, I feel. Tasha's knowledgeable, compassionate, community-driven, and she excels in more fields than pretty much any human should ever do. She's a woman of many talents and the barfly you dream of. We literally can't wait to chat with you. Welcome, Tash.
Wow. I don't know if I can ever live up to that intro, but thank you, little bro. That was magical. Wow, thank you. I promise you the drinks were not that bad, otherwise I wouldn't have come back.
Well, I guess so. Yeah, I guess that's a sign.
That's a good sign.
There must have been worse ones before, right?
There were definitely worse ones before, and I think I mean, a credit to the fact that I think I've chased most of you, around the globe as you've gone on to big bright things. So yeah, good times.
Awesome. Well, hey Tash, we know a little bit about you, but there's also a lot of things we don't really personally know about you. So first and foremost, we want to cover a little bit of who are you. So tell us a little bit about your background, your work as a business strategist, and why you do this and where it came from, I guess, and what's it like.
Cool. Okay. Interestingly, I just had to explain this to somebody the other day, and I have been super lucky, I think, to have what I call kind of a portfolio life before having a portfolio life was cool, which is that, I've had a bunch of different things that I've done, a bunch of different experiences I've been able to kind of utilize and craft into tools, and I have those tools in my toolbox. My first foray into what has become my career was actually an English assignment that I got at school where we had to write our own eulogy, and I wrote my assignment in like 10 minutes, and all it was I want people to say that I helped them change the way they thought about life and the world, and consequently things were better. And that has actually been the motif throughout all of my work. I mean, I'm probably a bit of a natural born storyteller, and so went into radio and communications pretty early on, and saw the power of how good storytelling, good communication can make the world of difference to pretty much any social structure, whether it's business, whether it's families, whether it's, social organizations. And so have kind of just doubled down on that path. So radio and the theater of the mind and interviewing people and finding out their stories became communications and communication strategy, which then became digital communities and forming digital connection and communication online, which then became transformation, which if I go back to the very beginning, it's always been about transformation. It's always been about meaningful change, whether that's, in just talking with somebody who's having a tough day and helping them reframe that or move forward, to changing a whole business. And so those keys of transformation have just continued to be there the whole way through. So 7 years ago, I was working in an agency running digital strategy for Tourism New Zealand, and loving what I was doing there and the opportunity to kind of do good for the country by getting more people to come here and boosting the economy. And that I think really gave me a love of like tackling hard problems, tackling challenges. And so that's what led me to now I work independently. Along the way, I continued to pursue a love of writing, because that first essay that I wrote about, hey, when I'm dead, say this about me, came from a place, a love of writing, and I've always loved that. So along the way, I've continued to try and enhance and develop my skills as a communicator, both broadcasting, writing, and that's kind of where I am now, working independently again and just trying to help people find meaningful change. So sometimes that looks like helping them restructure a business. I do a lot of work with startup and scale up companies, people who have they've hit their first milestones and they're now like, okay, how do I do the next thing? And I do a lot of work backwards, like from the kind of C-suite top level, to like, how do we actually kind of become, a people-centered business? How do we use some of the design thinking technologies that we have to do things in a better way and achieve better outcomes?
Yeah, awesome.
Amazing.
Impressive.
Oh, that's incredible.
That's awesome. Hey, Tash, can you tell us a little bit more about, now, obviously you returned back to New Zealand, a year ago now, pretty much?
It is exactly 375 days.
Yeah.
Since I have used my passport.
Yeah. So you swooped in pretty much just before we got locked down.
Mm-hmm.
And even for the first 7 to 8 months, and you may even still be doing it. You've been doing a lot of travel, but also work between New Zealand and the US. Can you tell us a little bit about what this is like, the problems that you may have come across, and the different struggles, probably timelines, and definitely yeah.
And why you were in the US?
Yeah.
I was in the US. I've been based in the US. I've been a frequent flyer to the US probably for, the last 12, 13 years. One of the things that has always drawn me to that culture, there's a lot of things that are a little repugnant, but one of the things that has always drawn me to that culture is relentless optimism and a desire to try things and give it a go, which is so the antithesis of the antithesis of some of New Zealand's kind of tall poppy syndrome, and also kind of our number eight wire DIY kind of attitude. I really wanted to focus on working with clients that were in the space where they were going through significant transformation and change, but where I could do that in a way where I could bring my skills in, affect some meaningful change, and then move on to the next meaningful, thing. As opposed to kind of the attitude of, hey, we'll just employ you and then, you're there forever. Partly that's because, I wanted to have this freedom and flexibility to be able to continue pursuing my work as a spirits writer and being able to travel and visit and be immersed in that world. And also just, there's scale internationally that we don't have here. There's also, a major difference, I think, in business that I noticed, and I'm still working with a lot of my US clients, so I do a lot of early mornings and a lot of late nights, but one of the things that I notice is there's actually increased flexibility, and there's an increased desire and willingness to engage with somebody outside of a business to help answer the questions that we can't answer for ourselves. Whereas in New Zealand, we tend to be a bit more like small business minded. So we tend to just be like, I'll watch a YouTube video, or I'll read a book and I'll figure out how to solve that problem, as opposed to paying somebody else who's an expert to solve it for me, or to work with me to solve the problem, because that tends to be what I do. So I mean, those are some of the kind of the differences, I guess, that I notice, you know, between those two mindsets. And shifting backwards and forwards between them is a little confrontational. It certainly has been in the last 12 months as we've been kind of dealing with these different kind of COVID, you know, things. It's like, oh, wait, what's normal again? Wait, what is that?
That's so true. I'd never really thought about that Kiwi culture of, really wanting to do it yourself and being, I mean, it's the tall poppy piece, isn't it? It's, There's
definitely that element of not just wanting to ask for help.
That's so true.
It's so true. Yeah.
Don't want to bother everybody.
Yeah.
Well, also, I think like a reluctance to pay for it. Like,
oh yeah.
I can't emphasize enough how much people are just like, I'm sure I can figure out how to do that myself. And so instead of investing some money and getting some expertise to get it done well and to get it done fast, like people will be like, oh no, I'll figure that out. It's like, anyway.
I mean, I would actually, on that exact thing, when I first got back, obviously I was doing a lot of consulting, but almost all the consulting pieces I was doing was for people who either own businesses that had international experience or understood that there was potentially a need for it. I got a lot of, not necessarily pushback, but I got a lot back from Kiwi bartenders and Kiwi bar owners that were like, but we just do it ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know? So
and there's definitely some value to outsourcing, because I think when we try and do too much, right, if we stretch ourselves too thin, you can't do anything well. And there's so many people who are experts at what they do. So 100% is a mentality. So to kind of try and summarize what you do, and there's a lot for anyone who's listening here. So you're involved in journalism, you do trade media, you do coaching, you do business consulting, you're on a radio show, and also you do spirits awards tasting too, right? And spirits writing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's a lot. Have I missed anything there?
Are you a musician too? How's the band going?
I'm back in practice mode.
Well, musician too. Wow.
You made me feel really good about the stuff that I do.
Quantity does not necessarily equate to quality. Okay.
No.
So there's a lot going on, and a lot that's quite adjacent to our industry, particularly with, I guess, the spirits writing and the business consulting. So I feel like there's a lot we can learn from you. But out of curiosity, what's one of the favorite projects you have on at the moment?
Golly. Well, and I'm trying to figure out, can I even talk about it? Which I think I can. So, I've got two favorite projects that are happening right now. One of which is, and they're both very similar in terms of they're both about creating and launching something new that is a platform for the future, that will generate more industry, it will generate more interest, it will generate more opportunities. And those things are really exciting to me because one of, I guess, the key values that I live with is with people. So it's almost never interesting to me if I'm creating something or trying to build something that's just for my own interests. I'm always way more interested in what can I do to work with other people on this and do something that's going to produce opportunity. So the first is a new food journalism platform that's going to be specific to New Zealand, and we're very close to launching that. It's called The Feed. Been working on that for about 6 months with a couple of business partners, and we are really excited about the opportunity of bringing some of what I've loved about my international travels, being some of that international food journalism and the ways that we write about and engage with hospitality experiences. So I'm very excited about launching that here in New Zealand. I think it's going to elevate and also create opportunity for new voices to be heard. I'm very, very committed to increasing diversity within our food and spirits writing sector here in New Zealand. So that's the first one. The second one is that we just about a month ago we signed off and were able to pass the New Zealand Whisky regulations into the DSA distilled spirits Aotearoa. We were able to pass that in, and what that actually means is that we're right at the doorstep of forming the first New Zealand Whisky Association, and so leading the charge on that, which will be it's a specific association to protect, educate, and push forward the New Zealand whisky industry. And I just couldn't be more excited about that. As a spirits writer, but also as a consultant, facilitating that project has been amazing. As a writer, it's incredible to have the reality check of going, oh, I'm creating the chronicles of what could be, you know, really amazing history for New Zealand spirits industry in, you know, 10, 20 years. And so that's pretty exciting. That's thrilling, actually.
Yeah, awesome.
How
how did you end up getting involved, Tash?
Do you want the real answer? Or
Yeah, a real answer. We want the real one. The real one, because I know exactly.
So I had joined Distilled Spirits because I obviously am deeply involved in and wanted to formalize, you know, my commitment to the hospitality industry, the spirits industry here in New Zealand, as well as, you know, internationally. And it made sense for me as a writer to be able to say, hey, I'm as committed to this as you guys are. This isn't, you know, I certainly don't write for the money. So I had been involved in the DSA, and I'm friends with a lot of New Zealand's distillers. You know, some I've been friends with for, you know, since before they started their distilleries or just as they were starting. And so I was aware of the conversation going on, and I was also aware of the fact that the conversation was faltering. Long loops of, as you can imagine, when it gets to you know, conversing about the finer points of what are we going to say is okay and what are we going to say is not. Really challenging, I think, for a group of people to negotiate or discuss that amongst each other without there being, you know, potential layers of individual agenda or at least an openness. And so I was aware that the conversation was stalling. It had been going for 2 years, and I'm a facilitator. I do business strategy in my day job, and it only made sense to lend that strategic skill to facilitating this conversation. And so I offered my strategy services to the DSA, and they said, yes, please. And so we got in there and we got it done. Now, I'm not trying to take credit for getting that done. That's the role that I played. The credit for actually getting it done is the commitment of the New Zealand whisky distillers that participated to engage with one another, to be open, to create a set of regulations that would benefit everybody. I just helped give them some frameworks for getting there.
Yeah, awesome. Now I might have a little bit of an insight on this, but was there any challenges or challenges that you faced with regards to the change in legislation around this, or I guess the addition of legislation?
As in pushback to the rules themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're a brand new industry, right? So,
well, we're brand new.
We're not. Yeah,
we're brand new, and yet we're not. So the challenge that you have is, so one of the things that I think is really fundamentally awesome about how we've got to where we are is that we had consensus. Now, consensus is not unanimity, but consensus is the majority of people agreeing, hey, this is actually for the greater good of the industry if we all play by these rules. So we did have some pushback, which we've resolved for now. I would say that it's resolved, where there were people who perhaps hadn't engaged in the process, although they had been invited to, who then maybe were a little surprised at the fact that we got there, or surprised at where we landed. But most of those conversations have been resolved with, or most of those kind of, and they're really just questions, right? It's like, well, how did you get to this, or why did you land on that? So, you know, in the weeks following releasing the regulations, there was, you know, I had a number of lengthy conversations with people, you know, kind of walking through, here's how we got to where we did. because so much of our history is Scottish, we have a deep, deep history, but it's not appropriate for us to simply superimpose the Scotch whisky rules on top of a whole community of distillers who want to experiment with American style whiskey, who want to, and I'm particularly passionate about this, actually find and define and continue to craft what is the New Zealand character of whiskey that makes us a new world whiskey. We come from old heritage, but we're also wanting to create space for people to do new things. So there was some tension around that, but it's been resolved and we're moving forward together, and I think that that's the most important thing.
Yeah, cool.
That's great. That's great to hear that everyone was willing to work together about that as well.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, one of the examples that I could give would be, and there's lots of historical context, and we can get super booze nerdy about it, or we can't. But basically, in the Scotch Whisky Association rules, what's actually in the UK legislation is the requirement that every part of the single malt process happens at the same distillery. So absolutely everything. Barley comes in, it's mashed, it's fermented, everything happens in that one place. In New Zealand, if we were to do that, we would have a significant challenge to some people who are already producing internationally award-winning whiskey, because they have really constructive and proactive, positive relationships with excellent brewers who produce really good wort that makes really good whiskey. And so we wanted to ensure that there was space for that to continue, that the skills, are appropriate. And that's been kind of interesting for some people, but that's where we've kind of said this is where we want to make sure that even though there are distilleries who could have pushed and said, no, we're doing it end to end, and therefore we think everybody has to. Nobody was prepared to say, oh, well, that means that we're going to say goodbye to, this producer, for 2 or 3 years while they figure out how they're going to build a whole extra part of their distillery and find new premises and do, it was like that. We wanted to work from where we are and move forward, and people working together made that possible.
Especially because some of those guys as well, the people who fall under that category are not only some of the leading whiskey distilleries. I think there's very few, if not maybe you can count them on half of your hand, who go end to end. Is that correct?
Yeah.
In New Zealand at the moment. So it would cut out a lot, and that's a lot of redevelopment for people. So I guess there is that little Kiwi ingenuity where we've offset and we've gone, hey, we don't do this perfectly, but we can do the distillation piece. But yeah, so it kind of needs to be tied in.
A number of those operations, they actually work really cohesively because they're like literally in the same building, but 2 different premises and 2 different operators, so yeah, it just makes a lot of sense.
That's it. Choice. Thank you.
Nice. Yeah. I've got another question, but I'll ask that later on. I'm actually, this topic that I want to cover is just a bit of your insights on what's been happening lately. And obviously the big topic that has been happening with everyone for our podcast series is COVID. You mentioned earlier that you're starting up food journalism, the feed. And I wanted to kind of just touch a little bit on that. How have you seen the effect of COVID on the food and beverage industry? Is there insights that you might have around what's happening production-wise, or is there something that you can tell us about the feed that might give us a bit of insight?
Sure. I mean, gosh, where to start? So interestingly enough, if we talk just about, so I'll talk a little bit, I guess, about production first and foremost, and particularly in the spirits and product space. So importers have already experienced just the colossal delays of what it's been to actually get international product into market. And I think every distributor and every retailer has felt the impact of that. Whiskey Galore down in Christchurch, just as one example, received a container in November, the end of November, that left Scotland in March last year. And so they spent a good portion of 2020 with less than 75% of stock on the shelves that they would usually carry. And so that's a massive impact for retailers and for distribution. But if we step back just a little bit further into what does that mean for producers here in New Zealand, that has meant much longer lead times in terms of sourcing bottles, sourcing corks, even printing and packaging supply has become more challenging and more difficult. There's also been some impacts and slowdowns on getting grain into the country, or source, like base product that's been used or redistilled into making other spirits. So there's been impact there. And then there's just the operational impact, right, of what people have and have not been able to do. So we have this, many people who have previously relied on international import to fuel their business have now flooded the local market with demand. That local market isn't necessarily able to keep up with that demand. And so there's supply issues here as well. And then we see this kind of extrapolating long shipping costs, which ultimately means price and product increase that either goes to the producer and eventually filters down to the consumer, or vice versa. So one of the big changes, I think, of COVID is that people are having to start to think about their business model differently. So smaller producers are actually having to think in much longer lead times. Larger producers and distributors are having to think in even longer lead times, and they're having to think about some of the conversations have been about how people actually broaden their portfolios in order to be able to ensure consistent supply of a category, not just a specific brand or a specific product. And so it's really interesting how some of those kind of business model components are starting to be affected. And that's before you even get to, hey, it's 5 o'clock and we're opening doors and we've got customers coming in to sit down.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of that from my side, from the distribution side. It's been challenging to say the least.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. So you must have seen some pretty cool things that some companies are doing that never actually thought about that. Like, that's a really good sort of strategy.
Okay. So I honestly, yes, but they don't feel that exciting or innovative to me. Maybe because, so for example, virtual tastings. Like, why did it take COVID for amazing producers and distilleries around the world to all of a sudden go, oh, we should be doing virtual tastings and like showing people around the distillery or, around about the place, like before we even, why did it take COVID? Because I mean, that's anyway. So I think that idea of what are some new ways that people can engage with our brands and our products? I think that's a really important thing to extend. I guess the way that I see it is both on-premise and off-premise and producers actually broadening their picture of the consumer from more than just the interaction that they're used to having with them. So seeing a customer as not somebody who just comes in from their busy day at work or whatever and sits at the bar at 5 o'clock and orders a martini, but actually seeing them as a person who has, 3 kids at home and is low on refrigerator space, or somebody who likes to host parties all the time, or somebody who, is managing multiple time zones and thinking about, how can I make things for them? How can I do meaningful things for them, that help them in their day? So whether that's, at-home cocktails, whether that's meal kits and meal boxes, whether that's opening up my back stock and giving them the opportunity to buy, premium products that they otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity to. Or, diving deeper into what are my customers really interested in? Oh, they're interested in organic and natural wines. Okay, how can I do, some education with them that otherwise I wouldn't have time to do if they were sitting at the bar in the middle of service. So those are some of the things that I've seen that I think have been, kind of well executed. Now, are they sustainable, in the future where everything goes back to normal? Who knows? That's the evolution of the business model. But I think it's really useful to see people starting to think about their customers in more of a context of their whole life, and not just, oh, they're at the distillery for a half-hour visit, or oh, they're in a bottle store and I've got the opportunity to sell them, something that's got an extra $5 worth of RRP on it.
Yeah, well, I guess it actually does make it interesting, because for so long you relied on servers and bartenders and chefs to be that person, that connection with the consumer, to be like, hey, this is the product, this is where it comes from. And the reason for that might have been because of the production side of it, whether it's the distillery or the farm or something particular, they didn't have someone that was the voice or didn't, feel comfortable enough. But now, I guess it's given them a stage to be like, actually, you know what? I've spent 70 hours a week in this place. I'm going to show you around and I'm going to tell you why I love this place and why you should. I would love to have you here someday. I think that's actually quite cool, and it's a really great to think about it. But yeah, I mean, talking about bars, like as Mikey said earlier, we were quite lucky to serve you for so many years and become really good friends with you. And you have definitely been around and seen a lot of bars, and it's been pretty impressive. Is there anything that you've seen in like any major changes in the hospitality industry that you've enjoyed? Like you mentioned about like pre-bottled cocktails and stuff like that, but is there anything else that you've seen maybe from your friends in the States or anywhere around that's kind of caught your eye?
Well, I think so. One of the things that's always frustrated me about coming home to New Zealand is that we have a bit of a leave and return culture, right? So we have amazing. I wrote a piece for Cuisine a couple of years ago, actually, where kind of talked about how New Zealand's kind of almost like a little bit of a cocktail finishing school, or like at least at periods of time there's been some of that space and some of that culture. People come from overseas because they want to live and enjoy New Zealand, but also it's a small market, so people can rise to the top pretty quickly. They can get a lot of exposure. They can, it used to be we had a lot more kind of cocktail competitions and things going on where people could really hone their craft, and because they were coming from a smaller market, get into bigger international platforms and communities. At the same time, New Zealand has produced a ton of really great hospitality talent that has left New Zealand and gone off and around the world and is doing amazing things, whether it's brand advocacy or working behind the bar, whether it's opening their own venues and establishing hospitality empires, or just working on the tools in some other forms of production. There are all of these things that have happened, and what's always frustrated me is that there's this sense of people leave, and they either leave and we feel really proud of them from a distance, but they never really come back, or they come back but they come back with all of these ideas that they've adopted from around the world. And so I've personally felt frustrated for a long time that we have this kind of the cocktail brain drain, and then people come back and we just get this like imported stuff, right? Where maybe the techniques and the ideas are really interesting, but I want to see them contextualized to a New Zealand experience. I used to be so frustrated with the copy and paste, and I felt like everything was copy and paste. Somebody would go to Melbourne and see a cool bar, and the next thing you know, they're opening a bar that sometimes even had the same name, but it certainly had the same decor, and the same drinks profile, and that kind of stuff. Now I think there are some fundamental ideas. Garnishes move in and out of popularity. But over the last 6 months, I've definitely been like, hey, let's up the garnish game, because I'm sick and tired of looking at boring drinks. So I guess what I'm saying is I sense that, and maybe it's partly because of COVID, but I sense that that there's a shift happening in the New Zealand hospitality scene, where there's a little bit less importing of other people's ideas and a little bit more unique focus on, okay, so what can we do here that's unique or relevant to our context? What can we do that's unique and relevant to our lifestyles? What can we do that's unique and relevant to our particular products? I think localization has certainly been a big impact of COVID. And the sooner that gets into our front end hospitality, the better. I mean, I'm always going to be a fan of, I'm always going to be a fan of the food. Word this really carefully. I'm always going to be a fan of the food that generic Asian fusion produces, right? But like, let's get out of generic Asian fusion. If I never see an Asian sauce bottle in my life, it will be too soon. But I'm interested in us looking less at what's international and what's in our backyard, in our extended backyard, and more what's in our backyard. And I feel like that's starting to happen, which is like, let's bring the technique, let's bring the thinking home from that overseas experience, but let's actually do things then in our own way with our own ingredients. And that is something I'm excited about. I'm also excited about the fact that hospitality here feels increasingly more grounded and increasingly connected to, okay, what are the fundamental principles of, how do we actually have lifelong hospitality workers that thrive and don't burn out, and don't, like, how do we help people stay healthy? How do we help them stay connected? How do we help them be whole and integrated people?
Yeah, that's so interesting. And there's a couple of things like maybe to comment on there as well, because totally agree about how like maybe finding our own identity in the hospitality space here, but also I guess we're one of the only countries in the world that can operate hospitality. The hospitality industry is fully operating right now, so maybe this is that time where everyone else in the world is looking to us and saying, hey, these guys are still working, whereas everyone else is shut down and maybe doesn't have the space to innovate. So that is quite a cool space for us to be in, and maybe we've never quite been there before. But you did really raise an interesting point at the very end there. And it's actually a question that I was going to ask you, so I might bring it forward a little bit. But I've personally been, I've been following you through social media and seeing like there's a lot of things that you do around hiking and gym work. And with so much going on in your life and all these projects, how do you prioritize your own balance and well-being in your life? Because maybe that can provide some inspiration for some other people out there.
Could help us.
Bro, you have a kid. Like, I'm not sure anything can help you other than that. So is the question about how I prioritize that, or what?
Or what do you do? Or what, why, how?
Okay. So this probably, I'm trying to figure out how I word this so it doesn't sound self-serving, but the basis of all of the work that I do, whether it's with individual coaching clients or with businesses and organizations, the basis of everything for me is values and values articulation. Understanding what really matters to you and what it looks like when that's being expressed well and healthily in your life, and what it looks like when it's not, is, I think it's the best navigational tool that I have used to help people find health and true balance in their life. Because true balance isn't actually, oh yeah, everything's perfect and in harmony all the time. True balance is actually what happens when you stand on a balance board and you're like, oh wait, let me get back. It's a constantly active piece, and your values are the core that keeps you stable, throughout all of that. So for me, some of those practices, some of the practices that keep me stable are absolutely, generosity is the number one for me. Generosity with my time, my resources, my food. I love to host people in my home. I love that practice of welcoming people in. Aroha mai, aroha atu is like the most important thing. So love in, love out, love in, love out. And one of the other components of that for me is nature, and is physicality, and being able to engage my senses. So everything from touch and motion and movement through to sight and smell, which is, I think, why hiking has been such an important thing for me. Understanding and recognizing what that does in order to connect me to, oh yeah, wait, I'm part of a bigger story. Not everything is about me. Let me get grounded again, and doing away with everything from overthinking the myopic things that turn me into a stress bunny, or just kind of relaxing and enjoying and taking care of my body by giving it the strength and the opportunity to play. Like, I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but like, why is it that when we're kids we just run around all the time, and it's like we run around, we climb, we're scaling mountains, monkey bars, you name it, and it's play. We call it play. And at some point in our teenage years, all of a sudden it stops being play and it starts being exercise, or it starts being like
100%. I've thought about that a lot.
Yeah. So play becomes important, you know.
I still run around and climb all over things.
I totally agree with that. Because there's often, like, as an adult, you're like, oh, I need to be good at this or progress, or I need to exercise because I need to do it. But then it's like when you shift that thinking into like, oh, I'm just gonna, like, I don't know, play social soccer with some friends, and then suddenly it goes from being exercise to enjoyment and play. And I think play is important, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So yeah, super interesting. I love that. Love the nature piece, relate to that highly. Love to spend time outside as well for very similar reasons. And you spoke a little bit about business coaching and consulting and kind of how values play out as a big part of that. Would you say that that's the biggest weakness or shortfall you often see in businesses when you do consulting work with them?
Yeah. And it plays out in lack of self-awareness.
Okay. Interesting. So what advice would you have to anyone who's wanting to start a business, or maybe even is currently running one, who maybe wants to address something like this?
Well, you should totally do my values workshop for starters, and get in touch with the values that are driving your business and driving you. And then come to an understanding of where those things are in and out of alignment. And I think one of the challenges is that for people, that sometimes doesn't feel like it's real work, you know. The shortcut that people take often is they want to start a business, or they've started a business and they're like, okay, well, how do I grow? And they assume I need to work harder, or they assume that they need to shortcut to making things before they've actually thought through the what, why, the where, and the how. In the way that perhaps would really benefit them. And oftentimes I think as well, you know, it's because they're already committed to a solution or an idea in their head. They've got a way of working, and they don't necessarily feel comfortable to reimagine that, or to try something different. But definitely having that self-awareness and understanding, this would be the other thing. We have drivers and we have motivators. Our drivers are internal to us. They're closely related to our values. They're the things that just innately start our engines and get us going in the morning. And they can be positive or negative, right? There's a lot of people who go into business because they're driven by a need to perform, or a need to be noticed, a need to be successful, a need to be to silence whatever voices is in the back of their head. Other drivers are really positive, you know, like, hey, I want to make change, or I want to provide for my family, or, you know, want to do these things. Motivators are actually the thing that's outside of us. And a lot of people, you know, they walk around, they're just like, I know I should do this thing, but I just can't find the motivation. It's a really big clue, because the motivation is something that's outside you, right? So don't find the motivation. Don't worry about that. Focus down on what's the driver. And if the driver is not lined up with the activity, like, okay, cool, maybe it's not the right activity. And so let's start, you know, trying to move people in the way that they operate in their businesses into their more unique DNA, you know, getting people comfortable with, I'm going to do these things that I'm good at, and I'm going to outsource, or I'm going to find more creative ways of doing the things that I'm not good at. And that's actually going to allow my whole business to be healthier, as opposed to, you know, just doing things the way we think they should be done, or buying into narratives of, oh, I'm just so busy all the time. Like, I'm so busy all the time. You know, because that's another kind of very New Zealand culture thing of, we got to be busy all the time. And if you're a business owner, you got to be busy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very true.
And
guilty.
Yeah. We have this conversation a lot between ourselves. Everyone in this chat right now is overly guilty of sometimes saying yes to too many things, and we're all actively working on saying no to more. So it's, we hear you.
Refining.
I do have one more or two more quick questions. One is around kind of, you mentioned a little bit about your workshop, and you do your values workshop. Are there any other resources or even good book recommendations you would have to anyone interested in learning more about improving business or anything in that space?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So many. And honestly, like, you know, the books that will work for you are probably the ones that actually are most inspiring, or, you know, most relatable. So I don't have like a top 5, hey, this is what everybody should read. But things that I found really useful, he's a kind of controversial character, Peter Thiel, but his book, The Art of the Startup, is actually great for people who are interested in starting a business, to think, to give them some freedom to think differently about how they do it and not just get stuck into, oh, this is the way that everybody starts a business, because when people start businesses all the time with this idea that a startup has to be like total grind and it's just got to be, all or nothing. And, he blows a lot of that out of the water. So I think that's really useful. The other one that I think is really great for creativity is Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point. Really, really a great way of just reframing your thinking.
Yeah, great book. I haven't read the Peter Thiel one, but Malcolm Gladwell, that's a great book. But yeah, really interesting. Thank you for sharing those. We'll have to look into that. And a really quick question around hospitality. Do you believe there's a specific place that you would like to see more hospitality venues improve, or area that you think a lot of hospitality businesses could improve in?
More garnish.
More garnish.
Flames everywhere.
Make things look prettier.
It's because everything's clear now.
Yeah, more garnish, less block ice. I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding.
You might get barred from a few places.
Wait, what? Yeah, I'm kidding.
Suitable garnish, Tash.
Yeah, suitable garnish. I'd love to see lots more storytelling in New Zealand hospitality, and I'd love to see lots more contextual hospitality, right? So because I feel like everybody says, oh, let's just do like one or two really simple things, but do them really well. I'm like, who cares if it's simple or complex? Just do it really well and give people an opportunity to make it fun. I think a lot of the times I see, when people dive down into storytelling, they have this incredible ability to tell really meaningful stories about the sustainability and the provenance of a drink and all of these things. And then they just it's like they've sucked all the fun out of it, which is, you have to keep the fun alive. But at the same time, you don't want to be so weighted down by the storytelling component that you're like, oh, wait, where have we gone in here?
Sounds like a fairy tale. It needs to be a combination, right?
Yeah.
It needs to have reality versus fuck, that's awesome. That's intrigue. That's really cool. Yeah.
And I think there's a good reality check, I think, coming, which is that one of the reasons why so much of that imported drinking style, why those, a lot of the reasons why it's been really successful here is because Kiwis don't really know and understand their own palates. Like if you were to say, oh, what's the Kiwi palate? You would actually have to say based on volume, based on turnover, you would have to say, oh, like sweet lolly water in an RTD, that's the Kiwi palate. So what I think is a really interesting opportunity is that with the borders closed, lots of people who would otherwise get excited about traveling overseas to experience great hospitality, that's a really cool market, and it's a really cool opportunity for New Zealand hospitality to really dive into defining, exploring, doing some experimentation around, okay, what is actually the Kiwi palate? It's because the myth of Sauvignon Blanc is that it's that exactly, it's Sauvignon Blanc, and we shouldn't settle for mojitos and vodka and soda being the Kiwi palate when it comes to, say our cocktail game. I think that we can do so much more with that, and we can explore a ton of stuff.
Yeah, I think with the focus currently on, defining New Zealand food and what is New Zealand food, I think very much the drinks aspect is starting to come along, and I think there needs to be that definitive piece that goes, hey, this is what New Zealand drink is, and whether you like it or not, actually, this is where our standardized classic palate is, and this is what we can work from. Yeah. So awesome.
There's definitely an element of that, but I don't think that it's just what is the Kiwi palate relates to the drink or the food. I think it's the whole experience, and I think as Kiwis, we just know we like to have a good time. And it's whether it's having a beer or whether it's literally having a very complex cocktail, it's as long as we are entertained and we have been told something, I think that's where we're in that sort of great spot where we can kind of create that sort of environment for people. And you're so right, if people aren't able to travel, they're going to be going out and checking out new bars and restaurants, or even bars that have been there for years but just never gone to. It's time to just get those new. I just have a couple of questions sort of like career chat, but kind of combining both worlds, where like hospitality and your background. I completely agree with you. You know, like storytelling is such a huge part of our industry, and it doesn't get enough. Like if you look at the back of a wine bottle or a whiskey bottle, there's always going to be a story. There's always going to be something, but it never always gets translated to the customer. And especially with how we have gone in the last 20 or so years with cocktail competitions, the story is such a big thing. It's like you've got cocktail competitions where you just have to make one drink for the whole whole competition, and that's it. But it comes down to your story and how you put yourself out there. I completely agree with you. Like, it's such a big thing. Like, do you have any advice that for bartenders who really like kind of like storytelling and like writing? Like, do you have any advice of how they could jump into your sort of world of like journalism?
Yeah, just start writing. And
just go for it.
And send it to me, and I'll publish it on the feed. Honestly, like, so one of the other roles that I have, I'm VP of the New Zealand Guild of Food Writers, and one of our projects for this year is developing diversity and providing a professional development program. The number of people who tell me that they'd love to write, and I'm like, cool, do it.
I love that. So cool.
Just start writing and send it to me. And if I don't have time to give you an editorial feedback or a developmental edit, then I will pass it on to someone else, and we will, like, because you have to, and this is something that I think comes back to you know, the New Zealand distilling industry, right? In order to have an industry, in order to build an industry, you have to have people doing it, right? So we'll never have an appetite for food writing or spirits writing in New Zealand until there are more people doing it, which sucks for me because I'm by nature a selfish and jealous person, and I want to guard my territory. But I actually realize, hey, you know, part of making a successful culture and industry around that is making sure that every single person who wants to write, who wants to tell a story, has an opportunity to do that. And that's something I see as a personal privilege, an opportunity to create platforms and to, you know, spur other people on. I think about people like Claire Filer, who's come home from the UK, and she's a real gin enthusiast. Her palate is really growing and is doing amazing stuff. And so, you know, it was an awesome opportunity to be like, hey, come on into the judging competitions for the junipers, and, you know, like making a big deal about the fact that there's another woman as well, which is awesome, but who's around, who's wanting to share stories about beverages that we're making. That's awesome.
Amazing. Yeah. It doesn't even just come down to just writing about big stories, right? Even just writing a wine list, I think, is so important. Like, I was quite fortunate to go to a friend's restaurant in London, and I'm not the biggest wine person in the world, but the way that their wine list was structured and like the adjectives that they use, I was like, oh, I can figure this out now. I know what I'm doing. Not really, but I can figure it out. Cool. That's really reassuring to know. I've definitely got a few friends that like to write and just haven't know where to go with it. So I'll definitely put them in your direction. Any challenges that you face in your career? I mean, it's obviously you've got quite a lot going on, but I'm sure there've been some challenges that have really stood out.
Big challenge for me, which I think has a big challenge for me, is team. Like I said, one of my values is with people, and a lot of the work that I do is primarily independent. So the more opportunities that I have to work with other people, whether that's collaboratively or in teams, I really thrive on that. And so that's been a challenge coming back to New Zealand, because I've been sort of separated by distance and time zones from, you know, people that have formed part of my kind of working team. So I'm working on trying to piece that back together, which is useful. I do think one of the big challenges that I have faced has always been probably where we started this conversation, which is like, but you do all of these things, like, how does that make any sense? You know, and my mother used to say, like, yeah, but what's your job? Like, but what's your job? And I'm like, well, I do all of these things, but I don't do them all at once. You know, some of them I do 3 hours a day, some of them I do 30 minutes a day. The challenge is helping to educate people beyond their expectations or beyond their assumptions about what this kind of portfolio life means. Like, how can I be a business strategist if I just sit around drinking booze all night? And I'm like, well, I mean, my work to date's been pretty good, so it's working for me. Just jokes. I got jokes.
I feel like you don't drink booze all night. Not all night.
Mostly just the afternoons.
Starts early.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, in the same way of hospitality, it's whether you're a manager or even whether you just want to see someone succeed, your colleagues succeed, it's all about teaching and kind of sharing your experiences, right? Which is great. Is there something that you've learned that really stood out? Sorry, this is the last question for me, but something that you learned that really stood out for you going through the pandemic?
Look, I thought I was an optimist. I thought I was an optimist, and I learned over a couple of different instances during the pandemic that while I have optimism, it's a muscle that I need to exercise more often. And I think I would say probably full on credit to Jacob Rice, who managed to sort of bounce me back into that kind of frame of mind and thinking, in a few late night, early morning phone calls when I was just like, I don't even know what the heck is going on. Optimism is a muscle that you have to practice. You have to exercise it all the time, and exercise it with pragmatism, not just fantasy kind of thinking. And I think the other thing that I've learned from the pandemic is how important connectedness is, no matter how you can get it. And just because things are not the way that they've always been, it doesn't mean that they're not going to be as good. Things are actually only going to be better in the future that we create if we move ourselves forward into that thinking of, hey, we're now in design mode, we're in creation mode of what the new future looks like. And I know that's really hard as we say goodbye to a ton of hospitality venues that we've loved. It's tough as we watch what's happening around the world, and it's tough to kind of wrestle with, oh my gosh, I kind of feel guilty sometimes because things here, are relatively so much better. But at the same time, we need to move into design mode and actually start thinking about what are we going to make the future to be, so that it is better than what was before.
I love that. What a sign off and what a way to answer the last question.
That's
Tash,
incredible.
it's been so interesting to talk to you. I think there's so many different areas of your life that relate to our industry. And obviously you have a big love for industry. So it's really cool to be able to share some of your story and some of your learnings with all of our audience. We're stoked that you have agreed to feature as our first guest for season 2. So thank you so much for making time out of your busy schedule. As always, if anyone's listening and they like our stuff, make sure you like, share, subscribe, do all that kind of stuff. We're on Spotify.
Anyone.
And yeah, what a great interview. So thank you so much. I don't know if the team has anything else they'd want to sign off with, but.
Oh man, thank you so much, Tash. As usual, always learning new things when we chat, and there's never enough time in the day to chat as much as we need to. So that was really cool. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for hanging out with us, and look forward to coming up to and hanging out.
Can't wait. Cuddles and fam time.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, sounds great.